So hello, Facebook Live listeners. This is John DeLynn. It's July 5th, 2017. And we've got about 31 people who have joined us so far on Facebook Live. Hey, Megan. Hey, Cody. There's Cam and Doug and Rick. Rick, I'm going to see you in a day or two. Becky. Hey, Becky. Carrie. Lots of cool people have joined us. Logan's joining us from North Carolina. Hey, everybody. Hey, Megan. Bart Campolo is super cool. And Bart's interviewing me today. Bart's dad is named Tony Campolo. And I've heard Tony Campolo described as sort of like in the vein of Billy Graham, just a nationally known, probably internationally known evangelical pastor. And Bart, as I understand the story, and I'll be interviewing Bart for Mormon Stories in a month or so. So we'll get the full skinny then. But Bart became sort of a youth pastor and started to get his own national or international following. But then he had this unfortunate experience of losing his faith as an evangelical minister. And it rocked his world because all of a sudden it was not easy for him to do what he had done because it's kind of hard to be a Christian pastor when you're not sure if you believe in Christ. So Bart has retooled his ministry to be targeting, humanists, secular people, non-religious people. And he's done it through creating communities in places like Cincinnati, but of most recent sort of time frame, Bart moved to Southern California and became the humanist chaplain at University of Southern California, where he tried to create community and administer, and I would say, by his account, successfully created, and I believe him when he says it, a secular community with humanist students and staff faculty at University of Southern California. I met Bart Campolo when I traveled to the Sunday Assembly National Conference with Steve Holbrook and Micah Nicolaisen and Christine Jepson Clark and Allison Udall. We all went to Atlanta to check out Sunday Assembly to see if we wanted to bring Sunday Assembly to Utah. And we ended up bringing Oasis instead of Sunday Assembly. But Bart was one of the featured speakers there, and I was blown away by Bart's knowledge and his charisma and his ability to speak to the issues that I was just starting to scratch. So Bart and I have been in touch, but it's taken us too long, and it's been my fault to actually do some type of podcast together. So Bart started his podcast in that time. Bart also just recently published a book, and I'm holding the book up now. The book is called Why I Left, Why I Stayed. It's a book that he co-authored with his father, Tony Campolo, and it's a really cool set of dialogues where they go back and forth and discuss, respectively, why Bart left and why Tony has decided to stay. And so Bart's doing all sorts of cool stuff, and he's just a general, really thoughtful, inspiring guy. So he started a podcast, wrote this book, and has been shaking things up. And he asked me if I'd come on his podcast. So that's what this is. So even though we're broadcasting this through Mormon Stories Podcast's Facebook page, this is going to be recorded as Bart's own podcast on his podcast called Humanize Me. And that's the name of Bart's podcast. And from there, I'm going to be interviewing Bart maybe in a month or so as well for Mormon Stories. And we're collaborating potentially on a new project that that we're thinking about trying to work on together. So without any further ado, we've got 41 listeners, which is not bad. Bart Campolo, I turn the tables over to you.
Well, thank you. And, before I start podcasting, I just want to say hi to your peeps, man. This whole Facebook Live thing is completely new to me. I don't even have a Facebook of my own. So, but I'm fascinated. And just when you started saying hello to people, I was like, there's real people out there. And so the idea that you can have this kind of like live interaction with people kind of both excites me and scares me a little bit, but I'm just so glad to be talking with you again. And so, for your people, one of the things to know is like, we both came to that Sunday assembly gathering excited to see what they were about. Like, neither one of us are Sunday assembly people, but that seemed to be right at the time, and still is, one of the most sort of popular forms of secular people who are trying to figure out what fellowship would look like. What would it look like to try to create a community that's built around values and shared values, instead of like dogma or doctrine, or supernaturalism, but just saying like, hey, if this life is the only one that we have, how do we make the most of it? And who have sort of collectively come to the conclusion that the way to make that there may not be any meaning to life, but that there can be a lot of meaning in life if we create it by loving each other and by helping to make things better for other people and by cultivating a sense of kind of gratitude and wonder just for the privilege of being alive. And so we went to that thing sort of going like, wow, maybe this is this thing that we're looking for. And I think we both kind of came away going, sort of, but not exactly. And the thing is that you and I both, a lot of the people that are in that Sunday assembly thing, they've been secular their whole lives. They never believed in any kind of form of supernaturalism. But you were a heavy-duty Mormon, and I was a heavy-duty evangelical Christian. And so for us, like, our taste buds are very refined when it comes to fellowship, when it comes to community, when it comes to kind of transcendent moments. And so we were sort of like, yeah, you guys, I think you know what you kind of want to be church for secular people, but it felt like they were keeping in all the parts of church that I didn't like. And they were throwing out all the stuff I thought was the best. And so I still love watching what they're doing. I think that they're great for people that's what they're looking for. But you and I coming out of that, we're sort of like, what are we looking for? And my guess is that the people that listen to your podcast, like the people that are overhearing us on Facebook, they're probably all people that are looking for something on the other side of their faith, or on the other side of their Mormon faith, or their evangelical faith, or now I meet people on the other side of their Scientology faith, or on the other side of their Islamic faith. Like, there are everythings out there. And so anyway, to all of so that's who we are. We're two guys who come out of faith backgrounds, lost our supernatural credulity, but still had a heart for community, and still had a heart for the intentional pursuit of goodness.
Love it.
And okay, so John, so that's where. So now all your people know who we're talking to.
That's right.
And now
the Bart Campolo. And if you go to Google and you Google Bart Campolo, there's a lot of cool stuff that comes up. Bart's been covered all over the place: newspapers, magazines, New York Times, tons of podcasts. He's super well known outside of Mormondom. And so Bart, you've done a lot of great work.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is, like, whenever I meet an ex-Mormon, I always say, hey, do you know my friend John DeLynn? And they're like, oh, absolutely. Like, I have yet to meet an ex-Mormon that doesn't know you. And yet, if I go to my secular kids at USC and say John DeLynn, they're like, what? It's the same thing for me. Like, in evangelical Christianity, if you said Bart Campolo, or even more so my dad, Tony Campolo, everybody knows him.
Right.
But then you go to a Mormon thing and they're like, Tony who? Bart what?
Right.
So, okay. So now we'll jump in and now, like, I hope your people aren't offended that I sort of act like it's my show.
Take it over, brother.
All right. So here's the thing. We just introduced ourselves to your people, but my people still don't know who you are.
Right.
And so I never know how to do these introductions. So like what I'll tell people stuff about you before I bring in this podcast. But for now, I guess I go like, when somebody says to you, "Hey, John, what do you do?" What do you tell them? What do you do?
So I think I'm most well known for a podcast that I started in 2005 called Mormon Stories. So it's the longest running and most popular Mormon themed podcast in the world. It's 12 years running, and I have over 760, almost 770 hours worth of content. And Mormon Stories was started with the intention of celebrating, exploring, and challenging Mormon culture and also the LDS Church. So that's my bread and butter. That podcast has tens of thousands of listeners at any given episode, and
it's almost all interviews, isn't it? Like you interview people who everyone I've heard is on the other side of Mormonism, like they're all ex-Mormons.
No, it's actually, I mean, that a lot of the people that I interview have either left the church or are leaving the church, but there's a lot of true believers that I've interviewed. There's a lot of people trying to grow a liberal or progressive space within, the LDS Church, within the ranks. And so it varies. Just recently, I've been doing a series on people trying to be progressive liberal Mormons inside the church. I've interviewed apologists, people who defend the church. So it just depends, but definitely, over 50% of the people I've interviewed are people who have left the church.
But what's funny is when people leave the Mormon church, they're still fascinated with the Mormon church, aren't they?
Yeah. There's a sort of a snide saying or meme that has been coined within Mormonism. They leave the church, but they can't leave it alone. And we, maybe you have an analog to that in evangelical Christianity, but we actually did an episode on that meme just recently, because what Orthodox Mormons want are you just to disappear. Because it's one thing for there to be, Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins out there attacking religion. That just makes Mormons more resolute to be believers. But when someone who's been on the inside, someone who served a mission, someone who's married in the temple, someone who dedicated their lives to the church.
Who wore the underwear. You wore the underwear.
Yeah, exactly. When they wore the underwear and they start doubting and questioning, it can become a real threat to other people who are still believing. And so the church just wants us to disappear. And we're not going to disappear because, number one, truth matters. Number two, we still have family members and friends who are in it. Number three, we love our people. Number four, we don't want to see more harm caused to people. We don't want to see more ignorance perpetuating. We don't want people to be fooled. We want people to be as healthy as possible. Don't forget the LGBT youth suicides that are happening at an epidemic rate within Mormonism. Don't forget all the marriages that are being destroyed when one person believes and one person loses their belief and the believing spouse takes the children and divorces the non-believer. Like all that pain and suffering and ignorance and suicide is sort of unacceptable. And so Mormon Stories, the Open Stories Foundation, all the work that we do in my nonprofit and our nonprofit is to promote openness and awareness, open discussion, to prevent harm, to alleviate suffering, and to promote growth for transitioning and post-Mormons.
If somebody said to you, because people ask me this sort of like, what do you want? Like at the end of the day, do you want to destroy the church? Like some of my Christian friends are saying like, hey, are you against us? Like, do you wish this movement would collapse? Like, what do people ask you that? Like, what's your end game? Like, what do you want?
No, believing Mormons just label me as an anti-Mormon and say, tell people to stay away. I think most of my listeners know what I'm about. But if I had to summarize it, this would be it. Let's say I could have a magic wand and I could wave that magic wand and every Mormon in the world and everyone who would ever investigate the church with its missionaries would know the basic facts about our church's history. That Joseph Smith, every time he told the story of God's visit to him, the story changed significantly. That the Book of Mormon has all these problems as a historical document. That the Book of Abraham, which is another part of our scripture, is not at all what it's claimed to be, a translation from papyri. It's not. That Joseph Smith had over 30 wives, that many of these wives were in their teens. One was a couple were as young as 14, that he married other men's wives, that he would send a man on a mission to, Europe or the Middle East, and then proposition his wife to be his own plural wife, that he propositioned probably 20 women before he ever told his wife that he was doing polygamy, that he was lying about polygamy. All these problems with Mormonism, I would just want every Mormon to know these things. Now, from the outside, you may think, well, that's all common knowledge. We evangelicals have known, all these problems with Mormonism for decades. The truth is, to this day, most Mormons, most active Orthodox believing Mormons, don't know any of the things that I just told you, because the church controls information and it controls people's thoughts. So if I could wave a magic wand, everyone knew, number one, all the problems with Mormon history and its truth claims. And then number two, people were made aware of all of the damage that the church causes to people. Again, the divorces, the LGBT suicides, the depression, all that stuff. If that could just be fully known, then I actually have no problem if people decide, well, it doesn't matter. I still want to be Mormon. It makes me happy. I can accept the collateral damage because I think it does more good than bad. I've got no problem with that. But I do have a problem with people giving 10% of their income, 5 to 20 hours a week of their lives, their children, to an organization that they actually don't know even many of the basic details about the organization, because it's been kept from them, or because they've been scared into fearing any external source or piece of information that would threaten their Orthodox belief. That's kind of what I have a problem with. That's on the one hand. And then, so in addition to full awareness and full disclosure, I think the second thing would be for all the people who are impacted by Mormonism in a negative way, that they would have resources to find community, to support each other, to learn that they're not alone, to learn that they're not broken and evil, and then in some way to heal and grow beyond Orthodox Mormonism. And whether they stay in the church or leave it, we as an organization are neutral on that fact. We're fine if people stay. We just want them to stay fully informed and to be able to find joy and happiness, whether it be in or out of the church. So that's maybe longer than you wanted a description.
It's so funny. I was so thrilled because I'm thinking, like, I get all these emails from podcast listeners who are like, you always interrupt your guests. You talk too much. You never let anyone else get a word in edgewise. I'm like, not this week.
Keep going, brother. I'll try and shorten it up a little bit.
No. Let me ask you a question, though, because, it's funny. I just had lunch with a guy today who, an ex-Catholic guy who's missing the church and missing community, and doesn't know where to find. And we had this whole conversation about how he could build and create fellowship for himself outside of that. And one of the things he said, it's so exciting to talk to you. He said, because just seeing somebody who's done it makes me think I can do it. He said, and he was talking about how that he was listening to David Blaine, the magician, talking about how long you can hold your breath. And he said, David Blaine said that when you see somebody else do this amazing thing, he said, you can actually hold your breath much longer. And I think it's the same way about creating fellowship and finding hope and meaning on the other side of faith. When you see somebody doing it, you go like, it's not rocket science, But here's the thing, is that he was saying, you're so nice to the church. Like, you don't have one of those negative church things. And I said, well, part of that's just not my temperament. Part of it is I never got hurt by the church, and I love all those people that are still in church. Part of it is just bad strategy. Like, if you want to rescue people from a bad way of thinking, you don't wave a flag saying, hey, you're stupid. That's a bad way of thinking as you approach them. You just show them an alternative. You just show them a better way of life. And a lot of times people are just like, well, gosh, I wasn't that excited about the believing stuff anyway. But the one problem that I have and he brought this up to me. So he said, the one thing that makes me think I can't sit still is original sin. He said, they're still teaching kids that just for being human, that just for having sexual desires, that just for wanting to eat and having to crap and just being a human being, they are worthy of damnation, that they are objects of wrath, that they deserve to burn in hell forever, except for the grace of God. Unless somebody saves them, that's what they deserve. And he said, I just can't stomach that. Does Mormonism teach that to its kids, that they are sort of unworthy by default?
Yeah. So interestingly, when Joseph Smith wrote this letter early in his ministry that tried to describe what the main tenets of Mormonism were. And they've changed a lot. But when he wrote the letter, one of the main 13 articles of faith for our church basically said, we believe that man will be punished for their own sins and not for Adam's transgressions. So Joseph Smith rejected original sin from the very start. So technically Mormons don't believe in original sin, but it's still very much a fact that everyone violates the church's commandments or rules throughout their lifetime. So whether or not we're born with sin, Mormons believe that by the time you're 8, which is when you're baptized, you're sinning within a few hours of getting baptized, and thus you still need Christ's atonement. So yeah.
There's plenty of shame. Like, you're human, and that's not good.
Oh, yeah. So all that stuff in the scriptures about even if you have bad thoughts, that's almost like committing adultery itself. If you lust upon a woman, you've already committed adultery in your heart. I think that's in the Bible. Yeah. I think it's in the Book of Mormon as well. And yeah, and if you masturbate, you're sinning. If you look at porn, it's a revolting, disgusting habit within Mormonism. If you touch a girl's boob, or if she touches you where she shouldn't, Mormons teach that sexual transgression is a sin next to murder. And so they pick these sins that are going to be pervasive among teenagers who are normal with hormones, and they liken those sins unto murder. And then even if you're not sexually transgressing, but you're simply looking at pornography and masturbating in the privacy of your own home, and let's just say you're doing it once every 3 weeks, Mormons are conditioned to call that an addiction, to view themselves as addicts, much like a drug addict would sort of think of themselves. They'll talk about themselves in terms of sobriety. I've gone 3 weeks without masturbating. I've gone 8 weeks. I'm sober. I've fallen off the wagon. But yeah, even Mormon girls, they're told, cover up your bodies, cover up your shoulders. Mormons don't, devout Mormons never show their shoulders, because if they show their shoulders, then they're causing young men to have dirty thoughts. And then if the young man, heaven forbid, touches the girl, then in some way she's complicit because she caused the young Mormon man to. And then even Mormon teachings about purity.
Is it all sex? Is it all sex?
It's a lot about sex. So if you're in Sunday school, they'll take a piece of gum and they'll chew it. The teacher will, and then take out the gum and pass it around and say, "How many of you want to chew this gum?" Well, that's what happens if you ever have sex before you're married. You're like a piece of chewed gum. What man is going to want you as a young woman if you've chewed that, if your gum has been chewed or whatever?
Damaged.
And so, yeah, there's just infinite ways that Mormons can feel guilt and shame. It's piled on. A lot of it's around sex, but it can be about anything, really. And it wreaks havoc. Of course, if you're gay or lesbian, you're viewed as an apostate. You're viewed as a pervert. Mormonism puts homosexuality next to, child molestation and murder in terms of severity. In some ways, it makes even same-sex marriage worse of a sin than murder or child molestation. And so, of course, that's why we have 3 times the national average of youth suicide in Utah, because homosexuality is viewed so abominably. So yeah, the list is long.
Yeah. See, and that's before you get into like caffeine and, and like greed or like, getting angry at your mom and all those other things.
Tea is a sin in Mormonism. Coffee is a sin in Mormonism. Some Mormons are taught that Coca-Cola, caffeinated beverages are a sin. So yeah, the list is long and deep.
So you don't need original sin. You can accumulate enough on your own.
You need about 12 minutes after your baptism and you've already got your sins.
So then like if I say, what do? You say like, well, I run this podcast. And this podcast it seems like it has the dual aim of educating Mormons. Like, here's all the stuff you don't know. And if you want to stay Mormon after you know all this stuff, great. But like, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories about people that learned this and how it changed their lives and how, and then it seems like the other goal of your podcast is to sort of have, and the thing is, like, that's the weird thing. Ex-Mormons, they're really nice too. And like, and they tend to, what I notice is that the tone and the language of the people, the ex-Mormons on your show, they remind me of all the Mormons I know. They're like these lovely family people with like 6 kids, and they're going camping, and like, they're just very family oriented people. And so it seems like the other agenda is to show people that there's hope, and that there can be meaning, and that there can be joy, and that there can be friendship and love on the other side.
Yeah. Yep. And the only thing I'd add is that a lot of our listeners are still active in the church. Either they can't leave because their spouse will divorce them, or they can't leave because they'll lose their job, or they'll lose their source of income, or they'll disappoint their parents or be cut out of their will, or they'll lose all their friends, or they don't want to be viewed as a disappointment. Those are some of the reasons. And then also just they don't know where else to go. Because for me, I tried the Episcopal Church, I tried the Unitarian Universalists, I tried Presbyterian, and none of it felt good to me. Just like, I think you can relate to that. And so they just don't have a better option. And so a good chunk of our listeners and supporters of the nonprofit, they are still in the church. And so for them, what we do is there are two other podcasts that the Open Stories Foundation sponsors. One's called A Thoughtful Faith, and one's called Mormon Matters. And both those podcasts are specifically targeted to people who are trying to stay in the church, maybe as agnostics, maybe as semi-believers, maybe as complete atheists. Maybe they hate the church, but they just...
It's like Radio Free Europe. Like, we know you're in there. We know you're...
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to try to help you survive.
And there's some who just still find spiritual value in the church, even if they don't really believe all of it, or even if they're not Orthodox. So for them, it'd be like Reformed Jews. They value the ritual. They value some of the spirituality. They just don't buy a lot of the truth claims. So we do target them, but then we also target the majority, which are, I don't know if people know this, but of all the people in the world right now who were ever baptized Mormon, and let's just say there's 16 million of them, only about a third self-identify as Mormons today. And so the majority of people baptized Mormon, 2/3 leave the church. That's actually accelerating. So yeah, a good chunk of our listeners are people who just can't make the church work.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So, and like, you and I, one of the reasons that we connect is because we stay up at night dreaming about creating communities for people where they can thrive and they can pursue goodness and they can find a sense of mission and purpose and belonging and transcendence even. Like, by transcendence, I don't mean magic or supernaturalism. I just mean like that exciting moment where you go like, I'm part of something bigger than myself. Like, it can happen at a concert. It can happen in nature where you just go like, oh my gosh, the universe is gigantic and I'm part of it. And I'm not the most important thing, but I'm connected to something that's really beautiful and amazing. And so like you and I sit up at night trying to figure out how to make that happen. And you've tried a few things.
Yeah, we have.
How's it going?
Well,
what have you found out?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. So I'll talk a little bit about our history. So So I started the podcast in 2005, and by 2007, 2008, it really was taking off. We had thousands and thousands of listeners. When Facebook came on the scene, I remember Facebook coming on the scene around, when did Facebook come on the scene? Anyway, at some point, Facebook created groups. And around 2010, 2011, we just decided, for many, many years, I just tried to answer every email that I could, have phone conversations with as many people as I could. People would travel from all over the world to want to meet with me for lunch or dinner. And I had thousands and literally thousands and thousands, probably over 10,000 phone calls or email exchanges or lunches or dinners. And I'm seeing you shake your head.
That's my life. That's my life right now. That's right. What I'm, yeah.
Yep. And at some point I just realized I can't answer all these emails. I can't support everybody. And there's just way more pain than I'm able to support. So in 2011, when Facebook created these groups, we actually created 100 Facebook groups all over the world. The Boise Mormon Stories Facebook group, Dallas Mormon Stories Facebook group, London, England Facebook group. And this
just
wasn't
just so these people could meet each other and find each other?
So they could support each other. Yeah. So instead of calling me, they could meet in a coffee shop or, at a McDonald's or in someone's home and start having book clubs, start having dinner groups, play groups where wives could get together while their kids played together. That was the idea. And Mormon Stories wasn't the first Mormon group to do that. There's a whole website called Post Mormon that's not active like it used to be. But at the time, it was one of the main go-to websites for kind of alternative Mormons. And they created some of these support groups as well. And it was really interesting because these groups started taking off. And some of the groups within a very short amount of time had, let's just say, hundreds of members. And at this point now, today, some of these groups have over 1,000 members, and they have weekly activities, and it's really, really powerful. So that was one thing that we did. And I just want to make.
I thought you were going to tell me why it didn't work.
I'm getting there.
Oh, it did work?
Well, it worked and it didn't. So I'm going to share with you my screen really quick.
Okay.
And I'm going to plug something that's actually really important. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay. So
as an podcast can, but like I can.
Okay. So if listeners who can't see this, we've pulled up a website called mormonspectrum.org. And if you go down to the bottom, it says communities map in the bottom left.
Okay.
And if you click on communities map, what you're going to see is this world map with all these dots on it, right?
Yeah.
And as you zoom in to any specific area, I'll zoom into Los Angeles, okay? What you can see there are all these little green dots in Los Angeles.
Right.
And as I click on each dot, you'll see, okay, there's a meetup group. It's called the Los Angeles Area Post-Mormon Ex-Mormon Meetup Group. So that's a meetup.com site.
Right.
And then over near San Bernardino, there's an Inland Empire Post-Mo group.
Okay.
And then in Anaheim, there's an ex-Mormon group there. And then if you go even closer into Huntington Beach area, there's Los Angeles Mormon Stories. Now, that would have been the group that we created through Mormon Stories. And there's some in San Diego. There's a bunch in Northern California. All over the United States is dotted with these support groups. And this Mormon Spectrum project, which is not owned by the Open Stories Foundation, my nonprofit, but it's a project that we helped incubate and that spun off from our work. It's become this network of hundreds of support groups for liberal, unorthodox, progressive, and post-Mormons across the world. So that was kind of stage one, and it has been successful in the sense that it's made so many enduring communities and friendships where people were able to form best friends, couples were able to find other couples like them.
People have they have the same pathology. They came out of the same scars. They can talk about how their moms don't understand them anymore and won't talk to them. And
Yeah, and they go skiing together, and they go biking together, and their kids are friends, and they go boating and camping and fishing and all that stuff.
Okay.
And in that way, it's been a huge success. I can tell you thousands and thousands of people across the world who are post-Mormons or liberal Mormons have lifelong friendships, deeper than any friendship they ever had from their actual Mormon congregations as Orthodox Mormons.
Right.
They now have friends for life from these groups that we created and now that other people are creating. So that part has been a huge success.
And
So
can I just tell you something, like in evangelical Christianity, there is no analog for that.
there's not.
No. As a matter of fact, people write to me off the podcast and say, hey, could you start something like that? And I don't have the bandwidth to do it, but I also have like 2,000 listeners. Like, it's not like I don't have 20,000 people.
Right.
But the weird thing is that, like, if I go looking for that, there's no analog for that where people are like, I'm ex-Christian. I think because the Christian experience is so diverse, like, like an ex-Episcopalian who just doesn't believe in God anymore has had such a different experience than like an hardcore fundamentalist Baptist in the South. But there's no, like, it's crazy to me. So, okay. So that is amazing. And you say, like, in general, that was a positive thing.
Oh, hugely positive. Now we learned important lessons and there were problems. But overall it was incredibly, and it continues to be incredibly positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that story doesn't have like an ugly ending where you go like, and then they all killed each other. Like,
no. But there are patterns in the experiences of progressive and post-Mormons that make community building complicated.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, when I was hanging with your people in Atlanta, one of the things they said was, when we first started doing this kind of work, we would run these weekend retreats at like a hotel, and we would get all these ex-Mormons together. And they said it was kind of disastrous sometimes because all these people who'd been sexually repressed their whole lives would come together ostensibly to kind of work through, post-faith issues. But he said, like, all of a sudden, like, everybody's sleeping with everybody, marriages are getting messed up, people are, getting involved in stuff that, that it was, in a sense, like you you threw people too fast. Like, they weren't ready for that kind of like hothouse environment.
Yeah. And I have to be, it's a very sensitive thing within my world to talk about this stuff because if I'm being completely honest, the vast majority of post-Mormons or liberal progressive Mormons, they don't get involved with any of that stuff. They just live happy, healthy, normal lives where they just go on and have a healthy marriage and their kids are healthy and they find other things to do on Sunday. So it would be completely wrong to say that even a majority of post-Mormons follow any path like what you're talking about. Like, I personally, I still have never tried alcohol. I'm still married to my wife. I've never been engaged in those kind of things you're talking about personally.
Did you quickly become a polyamorous drug dealer?
I'm not yet a polyamorous drug dealer. No.
Yeah.
So
not today. And you know what? Even as I say that, I got to be careful because in terms of my background, like, that's a cheap joke, but like, I have polyamorous friends.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't have a moral judgment about that. Like, I'm not sure how that lifestyle is going to work in our society initially, but like, I don't have a moral judgment. I don't think there's any scientific basis to think that monogamy is the right way to be. And so, like, even as I make that joke, I go like, damn it, I'm just doing the same crap that other people do. So I apologize.
No, I appreciate that. And I've made similar mistakes. We actually did an episode on Mormon Stories about non-monogamy. And I was really tough on it. And a lot of my poly friends, I'll call them, have been and continue to be really upset with me for not treating the issue more delicately. But let's talk about that for just a second, because one of the things Mormonism is awful at teaching its members, Mormonism does a lot of great things. Like, I graduated from high school never having premarital sex, never trying drugs or alcohol, student body president, captain of the varsity basketball team, honors, National Honor Society, full ride scholarships. I was an all-American boy, and the Donny Osmond image of what Mormonism has been really carries true for a lot of kids. Mormonism creates a lot of highly educated, wholesome, honest, hardworking people. And that's not to say it's better than anyone. I'm just saying, I'll stand behind that claim. What Mormonism is not good at doing is teaching moderation to its members. And not only that, but there's
critical thinking.
Yeah, potentially, for sure.
How to evaluate and go like, how's this affecting me? What's going on here?
Yeah, there's acceptable sources of information, and you pretty much accept them. And then there's non-approved sources of information, and you just ignore them. And then you go and be a super rich lawyer or a super rich doctor or a super rich engineer, and you have lots of kids and you serve the church. But yeah, critical thinking, moderation are not things that Mormonism teaches. So yeah, there's this dynamic that happens sometimes when people leave an Orthodox religion like Mormonism. Number one is they go, holy crap, if this church isn't what I thought it was, I would have made so many different decisions in my life. I would have had multiple sexual partners. I would have found maybe someone who is more emotionally or sexually compatible with me. I would have tried alcohol and drugs in college and experimented with that stuff. And so they just
I might have tried improvisational theater and found my passion, or I might have,
or I wouldn't have been a housewife and had 6 kids. I would have gone on and got a graduate degree.
Yeah.
Like all these things. And so you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm 40. I'm in a midlife crisis. And I've given my whole life to this church that now turns out to be not true. And so it leaves you with this sense of like anger and missing out of like, what in the crap did I miss? And especially if you're in a marriage, like most marriages do, when you're in your 40s, maybe some of the excitement's worn off. Maybe, some of the glamour is worn off by that point. And so you're like, all the sex I could have had, all the parties I could have gone to, like that, it becomes a thing, not for everyone. But I went through this huge regret of like, what did I miss? So that's part of it. And then the other part is, for those who decide to experiment with alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever, they don't have a basic education of like, what's consent, how to have safe sex, how honesty and the ethics of sexuality, let's just say, let alone how to drink, what's a drink, what's responsible drinking. And they just have no clue about this stuff.
More basic, like, how do I know who's trustworthy? Like, how do I, in terms of friendship or a romantic partner? Because
totally.
like in the church, like they vetted everybody for you. Like if they were there, you knew their rules, you knew their ethics. But like the idea of like, hey, I've got to figure out if this person's somebody I should trust. If this is somebody I should fall asleep next to, and there's that is a skill, learning how to judge another person, not in that kind of judgmental, but just in that kind of common sense, like, who do you trust? Because
Christ said, judge not. And the church just solved that problem for you by, if you're a member in good standing, you've got a temple recommend, you just assume, oh, well, they must be good people. A lot of times they are, but Utah is also the nation's capital for affinity fraud and pyramid schemes because there's so many untrustworthy people that somehow slip through that filter. I'll add one more thing, Bart. One of the things I realized as I lost my faith is that I had outsourced my morality to the church. So instead of having this intrinsic morality born out of reason and out of life experience, adultery was bad simply because the church said adultery was bad. And I remember sitting in a hotel room in Cambridge, Massachusetts when I worked for MIT, and I literally had this thought. I'm embarrassed by the thought, but I'm not, because I think it's so normal. I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a woman who's coming on to me, and I've always been faithful because that's what Mormons do, supposedly. But now there's no big daddy in the sky writing down and watching what I'm doing. And as long as I'm a good husband to my wife, as long as I'm a good father to my kids, and as long as I don't contract some venereal disease and bring it home, as long as I have safe sex, if I have sex and just nobody knows, and it's just two people, exchanging, intimacy in a safe way, is it wrong? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is lying wrong if it doesn't hurt anybody? And I had these thoughts, and I of course, I figured
you didn't have a framework. You didn't have a way of like, what are my ultimate values? And like,
not intrinsic. They weren't intrinsic, right?
Yeah.
They were outsourced.
Yeah.
And so a minority of post-Mormons go through this experience where like they party and they lose control. They become addicted to drugs or alcohol. They cheat on their spouse, or they experiment with non-monogamy. And sometimes they experiment with non-monogamy and it works out great. But other times they experiment with non-monogamy and it ends up either wrecking the marriage or harming the community, or, just, being a last step before the marriage was going to end anyway. So you don't want to end all divorces on non-monogamy, but certainly I know a lot of people who experimented with non-monogamy who ended up divorced. And so
now I'm going to stop you because like that was a long tangent for us, and like it's a real thing, but like you said, it's a minority thing. But I think the larger, like when I go back to like, so what do you do? And you go like, I run this podcast. And then in about 2011, we started these groups, and oh my gosh, like these people found each other. And in most cases, it was just a positive thing. They made friendships and they felt less alone.
That's right.
So that was their first foray into, I guess, what you call community building.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more facilitation.
That's right. That's right.
My instincts tell me that while it's great when people find each other, like putting 100 people who are who have a lot in common into a room together that's not, you need something more than that to make it into a genuine fellowship or a transformative experience, or something that can like help people when they have cancer, or that can help people raise their kids. Did you find that people naturally knew how to take it to the next level and create sort of mutual care structure?
Yeah, that's interesting. Mutual care structure, I would say, yes, it was often found. But what I would find is that 5 or 6 or 7 couples would coalesce and become really close friends. But once you've got 5 or 6 couples to go to the pool, to go to the beach, to go out camping, you really can't have more close friends than that. And so what was more often happening was that these people would find a group of friends that they were comfortable with and then just kind of separate from the group because they kind of had their needs met. And I've had to struggle myself with.
Is there a problem with that?
That's what I'm saying. So you started this podcast by saying we keep ourselves up at night trying to figure out how to recreate this wonderful church experience that we had in a secular way. So many post-Mormons are like, I don't want to, I don't need this. I don't want to get together with a big group of people. I don't want to be associated with a big group anymore. I'm happy. I can go hiking on Sunday and get all the spirituality I need. I've got these 3 or 4 couples that are super close friends. I figured out how to drink responsibly. I figured out how to be sexually responsible. My kids are doing just fine. John, not only do I not need what you're trying to provide, in addition, I am triggered by anything that's almost with the post-traumatic stress disorder impulse reflex.
Anything that's organized.
What's that?
Anything that's organized?
Yeah, anything that's organized, anything that involves singing, especially anything that brings people together on Sunday in a room, anything where a charismatic person is up there in front talking. Like, get me away from anything that smells or looks or tastes or feels anything like the traumatic Mormon experience I just had. And so
how do you respond to that?
Well, that's kind of the project. That's the question that you and I are still trying to figure out. And that's what made me go to that Sunday Assembly conference, check out what they were doing. Then I went to Kansas City and checked out what Helen and was doing in Kansas City, with Oasis, and Mike Ouse was doing in Houston. And ultimately, we decided to bring Oasis to Utah, and we started 5 Oasis congregations or groups in Utah in an attempt to try and build that next level of community beyond 4 or 5 couples that just kind of get together.
And the obvious question is why?
Why do that?
Why bother? That's what they ask us.
Well, Bart,
I haven't answered that, but I want to know yours.
So I'm like you, and most people that I know, post-Mormons, oftentimes feel damaged by their church experience. I did not leave Mormonism because I felt damaged. In fact, Mormonism kicked me out because of my podcast, but I was still actively attending the LDS church up until my disciplinary council was sort of in the works. And so I loved it.
I'm so jealous of you for getting excommunicated.
Do you wish you
Nobody ever bothered to excommunicate me.
It's a privilege, isn't it? It's an honor. It's not super fun, but in some ways I'm proud of it. But thank you for the envy, for the excommunication envy. No, my parents were divorced when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and divorce can really wreck a family, and I just feel like the church was there for me to raise me when my parents weren't always able to be there for me. Now, they were great parents. I'm not saying they weren't there for me as parents, but when you've got remarriage and then divorce and then remarriage and business failings and things going wrong, you just can't be the same level of parent that you were with an intact family and everything going right. And so to the LDS Church's credit, they stepped in. The leaders showed up for me and showed me love. I went to these awesome dances. Mormons, whatever you want to say about Mormons, growing up in the 80s, they had the most amazing dances where they played Michael Jackson and U2 and, In Excess and all the awesome bands. And you would get this huge stake center.
I've never heard In Excess in the same sentence as all the awesome bands. But
what? In Excess was amazing in the 80s. What are you talking about?
You really are a Mormon.
Why?
Come on, that band was just so white bread.
What?
They were. Come on.
Oh, but we liked Men at Work. We liked, Journey and Styx and Foreigner and Rush and
I'm
Howard Jones and
The church created. It's so funny dancing too, because what does dancing do except stimulate the lust of the flesh? That's what they always used to teach.
But that's not what it did for me. Like I never had premarital sex, and I went to hundreds of Mormon dances, and just imagine 300, 500 kids in this chapel with a wooden, basketball court with a wooden floor, DJ going with the lights, and just hundreds of kids just having 3-4 hours of a ecstatic experience. And that's just a small part of my Mormon experience. We took trips to Arizona. We took temple trips.
Pastors came to your basketball games and cared about what you were doing and asked you about it afterwards. It was probably great for you.
We had dance festivals. We had youth conferences. We had testimony meetings, and kids would bear their testimonies and uplift and inspire each other. There were leaders who cared about us and best friends and intimate relationships. And it was just like summer camp for like 6 years.
They took leaders like you, like the sharp kids, and they said, there are some other kids here and they're not having as good a time. Could you go and befriend this little guy?
Totally.
And they taught you how to be a caring person. They taught you how to look out for people on the outside of the group. So you learned all these leaderships. They probably then had you planning the dances for the younger kids and all of this,
Yep. It's not just a Mormon thing, it sounds like. Yeah.
So here's what I hear you saying. Because this is the answer I give when those 7 couples say, hey, we're cool. I was like, hey, good for you. Good for you. Because I'm here in the inner city and there's a lot of people here and they're not cool. And I'm out here in rural America and there's a lot of people on meth. And you know what? They need a family. And the fact that you've got a family and even an extended family that you've created for yourselves with your friends, good for you. Now the question is, what about everybody else? don't you feel like a part of what you want to teach your kids is to care about the needs of the rest of the world? Well, that's why we build these churches. These church, like, so some people I'm like, I need you to join this church because you need this party. And those people, I always say, I know you don't need this party, but I think you need to help throw this party.
It's easier to make that case when the people believe that if they don't throw that party, they're not gonna, they're gonna either go to hell or have some inferior status in the afterlife. But once people believe that this is probably the only life I'm gonna have, and that Jesus guy, I'm not even sure if he existed anymore, and I tried that group thing once and it was cult-like, the best they'll say oftentimes is, hey, I'll give to charities. The charities can help that drug addict. The charities can help those kids in the inner city. I'll donate my time. Maybe I'll go donate in a soup kitchen every once in a while. But most of the people that I know, secularism doesn't provide the motivation to then turn and spend a huge amount of your time serving your fellow man. It makes you want to buy a boat. It makes you want to get a cabin and basically just spend as much of your life finding joy with your immediate family as you can, because you may not get another life.
Oh, I hear you.
I'm sure.
It kind of breaks my heart.
I'm sure you hear this all the time, right?
I do, but my experience with it is that after people have the boat and they have the house and they have the cabin, a lot of times they look at each other at 40 or 50 and they've raised their kids. Especially while you're raising your kids, I get it. Because kids can be consuming and you don't need any other external thing to give you a sense of meaning and purpose. But boy, you get to be my age. You get to be 50 something. Your kids are gone. And my wife and I look at each other on a Tuesday night and sort of go where exactly is the meaning of our lives? And ultimately, I think people get bored. And I think ultimately I look at myself and I think, what are the best stories that I have to tell? What are the things, if I look back at the last 50 years of my life and say, what are the things I'm the most proud of? What are the things that I reflect on the most? What are the things that make me happy? They're always opportunities that I had to get involved in the life of somebody and to watch them be positively transformed. And so a lot of times, if at USC, what I try to turn the kids onto is not just community for the sake of isn't it fun to be part of a big group? Because a lot of my kids go I don't need a big group. I'm cool. I don't need to be part. I don't need a group to give me a sense of belonging or identity. And I go, no. What I'm trying to turn them on to is not the joy of being part of a group. I'm trying to turn them on to the joy of transforming the life of another human being for the better. Because then the group is not the end. It's the means. It's just one vehicle. And there are lots of ways to transform people's lives. This is just one that I found that's very reliable and it's very flexible. But ultimately, what I'm trying to turn people onto is at the end of the day, another weekend at the cabin at some point is just another weekend at the cabin. The real joy of life. One real joy of life. You've seen those kind of positive psychology things where they're look, in order to flourish, people need fun experiences and meaningful relationships, but they also need accomplishments and they need a sense of purpose and contributing. And I'm listen, if you just spend all your time at the cabin, you're going to miss out on this opportunity to be an agent of transformation in somebody else's life. And I know somebody will say, well, that's just your temperament. You get off on that sort of thing. But I have yet to meet somebody who, when they have that opportunity, when that happens, it isn't the biggest thrill of their life. That's why people raise kids.
Absolutely.
And so for me, this community building thing is not because I love getting together on a Sunday morning and singing songs. It's about, I love seeing a person that didn't have any place to be all of a sudden feel like they have a place to be. And I love watching some really cool high school basketball player with straight A's who's got a full ride scholarship and go like, oh my gosh, like making that little kid feel like $1 million actually is more satisfying to me than scoring 40 points in the game last night. You know, I just like, for me, watching a cool kid figure out like that there's something to do with their coolness besides just enjoy it. I don't know. I like, and so like, that's the only case I can make for you know, because ultimately it's the same economic case. Like there are people that can feed themselves and take care of themselves, and like, why should they worry about anybody else? Like, let the world burn.
Yeah, it's almost, Bart, it's almost like it's like crazy. It's like that crazy Christ guy has reincarnated in 2000 and whatever, 15, 17, and is making the case again. But it's almost like we have to start over, because back then the case either was made from or got intermingled with this sort of like fear of death and motivation for heaven. And it's one thing to make the case of Christ, which is serve your fellow man, spend your life in the service of your fellow man, serve others, sacrifice. It's one thing to make that case with the incentives and the disincentives of obeying versus not. It's a whole nother calculus or formula to make that case without the incentive or the disincentive of heaven and hell. And so it's almost like starting over, right?
Yeah, but you know, like this thing, like when you spring up like the Jesus case, like first of all, like my stomach starts to turn, because like I never knew who Jesus was. I like, which Jesus are you talking? Like Jesus is just an icon that people project onto whatever they wanted to be. Like this case, like first of all, that wasn't the best, and like that case wasn't that good a case. That wasn't that good a case. The scientific case is better. Like this will cause you to flourish. The experiential case is better. Like just the pure self-respect case that says like, you know, I don't look at kids and say you ought to do this because for the other person needs it. I go like, when I come home, like I go like, when you go home at night and you look in the mirror, don't you want to love that person? Don't you want to look at the mirror and go like, that's a great woman. I love that woman. I'm so proud. You know, I said like, the joy of this stuff has nothing to do with external rewards. This is what they mean by virtue is its own reward. Like honor, integrity, humility, compassion, like these are the gifts a person gives themselves. Like I could never, even when I was a Christian, I was in Christianity for about 6 minutes before I stopped trying to motivate people to come and serve in the inner city with me because they would go to hell if they didn't. I always said the reason to come do this is because it is a chance to become a different kind of human being, and because you'll never experience meaning like you'll experience in this setting of service. And so like I don't get it. I don't. Like the Jesus thing never compelled me. The hell thing never compelled me. The only thing that ever made any sense to me was what could you do that would be more intrinsically fun than transforming the lives of other people in a way that makes them joyful.
And I think that has to be the value proposition. And so if I could augment, so I still have faith and hope in what you're putting down, Bart. So, you know, even though I'm laying down one side of a case, I want this thing that you're talking about. And it's basically all I've been able to think of for the past 5-10 years.
We just got to preach it better. We just got to preach better.
No, it's not just that. It's not just, it's preaching's part of it, but we have to figure out a formula. And here's what I mean. So part of the formula is the case, the altruistic case you're making, that it's make a difference in the world. It's more meaningful and it's really enjoyable to make a difference.
It's hedonistic. I just want to be happy.
Okay. So here's where, so in the case of Mormons, right? In the case of Mormons, we used to spend 3 hours a week on Sunday sitting and listening to super boring, congregational meetings. We call them sacrament meetings, where speakers get up and read these talks and they're really boring. And then we sit through a second hour of Sunday school where the same old lesson is repeated over and over again, and you never really learn anything of worth. It's more of a ritual of self-affirmation and groupthink where everybody repeats the same old teachings and everybody agrees. And if anybody disagrees, it's really awkward. And then everybody just kind of moves on and ignores whatever was said that isn't, subscribing to the groupthink. And then you sit through a third hour with just men or just women where basically you do the same thing. Mormons would go every single week for their entire lives to that and never really learn anything. And whatever formula Mormonism had, we don't have that luxury. And so one of the pieces of the equation that I see is us having the burden of making the Sunday experience so amazing, so incredible that people wouldn't want to miss it. And so that's something that both Sunday Assembly and Oasis are trying to do. Sunday, at least when it comes to Oasis.
Dream on.
Okay, well, let's just for our listeners, we'll lay it out and then we can critique it, right? So in Oasis, they'll get a local professor to talk about climate change. They'll get a local physician who's traveled to Africa to talk about their experiences, providing medical aid to the African people. They'll bring in a physicist to talk about space and Saturn and the rings. And just, it's almost like people finding local TED Talks, local people to give the equivalent of a 20-minute TED Talk. And then there'll be coffee and community. And sometimes, and oftentimes people will share an experience. They call it a community moment.
What do you think the selling proposition is there? Come to our thing and you will what? You will be stimulated.
You'll learn some stuff. You'll maybe be stimulated or inspired, and you'll meet other people, and you'll start being part of a community.
I can watch better talks at home.
Right. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people feel. And in Utah, I could go hike through Mill Creek Canyon and see beautiful nature on a Sunday morning, and all the Mormons are at church, and so the canyons are empty. I could go golfing.
You can't out entertain Hollywood, and you can't out educate Ted, and you can't, like, if you want to, if that's the biggest ridiculous waste of energy I could imagine. Now, I'm not saying there shouldn't be talks. I'm not saying there shouldn't be music, but don't kid yourself. That's not why people come. If they're going to come, that's not the people only want to like. Why do people go to CrossFit? Why do people go to those things? Because why do they go to yoga? Like I don't care how good the concert is. People aren't going to come back to a concert every week. I mean, there's improv groups in LA that put on hilarious shows every Friday night. People go and then they go back a year later, but they're not going to go every week because entertainment is not going to keep me coming. It's only if I'm at something where I'm with people that have a shared sense of mission, and together we are being transformed in a positive way. And so, like, if you're not willing to look me in the eye and say, I'm going to make you a better person, and you're going to make me a better person. Like, that's why we get together. We are working on ourselves, and we're going to do something significant together. If it's not transformative, nobody's good. Like, and that's the thing. Like, people come to Sunday Assembly and they go, "This is amazing. It was so much fun," and stuff like that. They're not going to keep coming year after year for a pep rally.
Right. And with Oasis, I should just say, my understanding is that the Kansas City Oasis and the Houston Oasis continue to thrive. They do service projects regularly as a group. In addition to the Sunday, they do meetings throughout the week. And I should also add that the Salt Lake City Oasis group is actually thriving. The other 4 Oasis groups in Utah, I'm not so sure about. I'm not so sure. The one in Cache Valley in Logan, Utah, where I used to live, it continues, but I wouldn't say it's thriving. I would say it's kind of continuing to exist, but not thriving. Now, the Logan and Cache Valley people, I've moved. They can update us if things are going better than I thought. But so I guess at the one hand, I don't want to sell short the great work that people like Helen and Mike and Joanna and others are doing with Oasis. but I do resonate with what you're saying, that maybe there's some elements of the formula that if we don't have, thriving is going to be a lot harder. And my opinion is,
I think I've been to those oases and I liked them. And like, I think you ought to have good speakers giving cool talks about, science or whatever. But at some point, it has to land in, and the reason we're listening to the science talks is not because science talks intrinsically are interesting, but rather, this is going to help us be more loving people. This is going to change us. Like we're trying to get somewhere. Or, oh my gosh, this talk, it'll be boring to you, but if you bring your friend from next door, this could be a really good introduction to them to this idea of, like, you've heard this stuff this Bart Campolo or this John DeLynn guy has said before. Bring your friend though, because this could be the place where they catch that idea that the way to be happy is by making other people happy. And if they get turned onto that idea, whoa, all bets are off. And so all of a sudden you go like, oh, the singing, it's to get us somewhere. Because I'm not going to sing for singing's sake. I don't like singing that much. But if you convince me that singing will help me change JoJo's life, I'll sing for JoJo. Or if you convince me that helping change JoJo's life will make my marriage better, I'll work with JoJo. Like, you've got to show that's the thing. Like, I'm convinced that these people have adopted a lot of the good stuff from church even, but what they haven't been willing to own is we're selling a way of life. And we think this way of life is better than that other way of life. So like a kid's selling meth on the corner and I go up to him and I go like, kid, don't come to my church because if you don't, you're going to go to hell. I go to him, kid, my friends are better than yours. We eat better food than you do. We have more fun than you do. I like myself way better than you like yourself. My way of life is really working for me, kiddo. I think it would work for you too. Now listen, if you're a part of that synagogue, if you're a part of that mosque, if you go to that church and you're thriving over there, I got nothing to say to you. But if you're struggling, I got a way of life. And the proof is like, look at my friends. It's working for all of us. And when I see those 7 couples up there at the cabin, and I go like, I'm so happy that you figured out how to love each other and how to raise your kids together. That's just beautiful. I'm so happy for you. You're really going to keep that to yourself? Really? You're going to keep that to yourself? Because like, I got to tell you something, like I got a feeling that if I stabbed a kid to death and laid him on your front doorstep, all 7 of you would run out and you'd pick him up and you'd bring him in the house and you'd bind up his wounds and you nurse him back to health because that's the kind of people you are. Well, just because he's not on your doorstep doesn't mean he doesn't exist. And so like, so my thing is, I'm not down. I think John, I think Mike and Helen, and I think the folks at Sunday Assembly, like, I think they're all doing amazing jobs.
Yeah, agreed.
Of creating this context. I'm just worried that in some ways they're not as evangelical as you and I are. Because you and I will look each other right in the eye and say, you know what? I'm in this to change people's lives. I see them where they are, and I think like they're not happy enough. There's too much pain there. Like, I'm here to relieve pain. I'm here to create happiness. And I think sometimes people are like, we're here to create a context where people can be and do whatever they want. And they can, and there's a great chance to learn stuff here. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not learning for learning's sake. I'll leave that to the university. This is learning for goodness sake.
I love that. Okay. So I know you're interviewing me, but this is a dialogue. And so I'm going to jump into interviewer mode for a second. Is that okay?
Go for it.
So when I've shopped this idea to post-Mormons, and I agree with you. I actually agree with you that, and I spent 6 years getting a PhD in psychology. Like, I just graduated a year and a half ago, and
Dr.
Thank you. And I've studied, John Gottman and his work on marriage. And I've studied, Shefali Sayberry and her work on how to raise a child. And, I've studied the principles of mental health. And I know that there are scientifically, empirically supported ways to sort of like become happy and fulfilled and to have a healthy, happy relationship or marriage and to raise good kids. Like in some ways, the university became inspiring in a way that religion was, because I think that the social sciences and the natural sciences have brought to us truth or wisdom that you could very easily build sort of a new way of life upon that was somewhat monolithic and somewhat universally positive. So I'm with you on that. But as I talk, you say my way of life or a way of life. Let's just say that you and I were committed to figuring out whatever kind of the good life is in a secular way, and then sharing that with as many people as possible. What my listeners and what my friends would say is, okay, wait a minute. So you're going to have some charismatic leader up there leading the organization? Well, that sounds a lot like Joseph Smith. Okay, now wait a minute. You're going to have a bunch of sort of guidelines on how to live? Oh, okay, well, that sounds a lot like Scripture. And these are sort of guidelines for how to live? Not only is that Scripture, but it's also like commandments now. And all of a sudden, there's going to be people who disagree. We're going to have to get rid of them because they're causing too much trouble. Well, now we're having excommunications all of a sudden. And then, by the way, John DeLynn or Bart, they get a little bit too close to someone in the congregation. And now all of a sudden, let's just say there's some marital thing that happens, or members of the congregation or leaders start abusing their money and authority. Well, how's that different from Jimmy Swaggart or Oral Roberts? Or, because scandal, anytime you get 200 humans together, some people are going to have sex with each other that they shouldn't. Some people with money and power are going to abuse it.
All of that stuff could happen.
And so basically they're saying, you're just basically recreating a secular religion, and I'm not going to be, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And they're scared to build what you want to build and what I want to build, honestly.
Yeah. And
they're scared.
Right. And my response to them is...
Or turned off or traumatic, right?
My response to them is like, first of all, like, you may be too traumatized by your first experience, like, to organize the next one. Like, you may not be on the planning committee for this party because you just got too hurt. Like, you're going to need a good experience before you can, get over it. But I will tell you this. It's like somebody comes to me and says, like, I loved somebody and they hurt me. And so I'm not going to love anybody ever again because I don't want to be hurt. And I sort of go like, you have every reason to be scared. If whenever you love somebody, you could be hurt. I'm like, unfortunately, I don't have any alternative to you, to like the human experience of love. Like, you're going to miss out. Like, you have to take that risk. And you go like, but I could get hurt. And I'm like, yeah, I know, you really could. And somebody says to me like, well, government, when you create a government, it can become corrupt and terrible. Like, it could become the Third Reich, it could become Stalin. And I go like, it's true. Governments can be perverted and governments corrupt. There's a whole history of that. And I go like, the alternative of anarchy, I don't know. Like, I don't think it's going to do very well for like the average guy, especially for the little person. And so like, I still believe in government. And you go like, but it can go wrong. I go like, I know. And Karl Popper, the great political theorist, said that the real job is not to come up with a system that gets you the best leaders. He said the real job is to come up with a system that enables you to get rid of bad leaders as quickly as possible, because he said bad leaders will emerge all the time. And I think like bad leadership in a congregation, or bad systems, or overly dogmatic people, like, it's going to emerge in any system. I go, what's the alternative? Like you say, whenever you have a bunch of people together, there's the possibility of conflict. I know. You got something better for me? And so like leader, people say, I don't want there to be any leaders. I go like, yeah, every good thing I've ever seen in the world, every good drama company, every good school, every good company, every good family, like everybody has somebody who goes like, hey gang, let's put on a show. Hey gang, let's get this. You need leaders. And so like the alternative is not like, let's get accountable leaders. Let's create checks and balances on our leaders. But like, you dispense with leadership, I don't think you're going to get very far. you say, well, don't be singing any damn songs. I got reams of science that will tell you that when people sing and eat and move and dance together, that they feel connected to one another. And so, like, if you got a lot of lonely, depressed, sad people, like I have at USC, you might want to sing some songs. You might want to dance and play some games together. And you go like, but that can be abused. And I go like, everything can be abused. Everything can be abused. And so on some level, I don't like, if somebody says to me, life is risky, I say to them, absolutely, life is scary and risky. So what do you want to do? And the answer is, I want to live.
Yeah.
I want to live. We're tribal animals. And you go like, but there's problems when people get tribal. Like I know. I want to live.
And so the trick is, well, I don't know what the trick is. Like, I can say that for the post-Mormons and the liberal progressive Mormons, most of us are middle to upper middle class. You know, I don't interact with people in poverty very often, very rarely.
Yeah.
And so these people, they've, you know, and I'm repeating myself here, but they've got good schools, they've got good educations for the most part, they have solid incomes, and they're like, I'm okay, like my kids are doing great, I'm doing great, and I'm happy enough. And so it's going to have to be something really compelling to get them to want to move out of their comfort zone where they're really happy.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to figure out. We have to figure out that formula, because if you ask me, I've lived in Seattle, I've lived in DC, I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in Dallas. And you fast forward a couple generations, people are just kind of isolated. They don't know their neighbors, they're living alone. And when bad things happen, they may or may not be connected with their family, because families tend to split up as everybody moves across the country. And I think that our nation, to the extent that it's good, it's been built on the back of religious communities that acted as a fabric for our civilization and growth. And I don't think the answer is more isolation and less community. I think we do need...
Every study would indicate that you have greater levels of affluence, greater levels of anxiety, greater levels of depression, greater level, I work on a college campus. Like, you got kids that don't know how to make friends. They got social media out the wing wang, but they don't know how to make a live connection. And so I think what you're going to find is that ultimately those people that say, like, I don't need this, their kids may grow up without a real sense of purpose, without a real sense of, like, when you're born on the top of the mountain, where do you climb? And so for those kids, what may have to happen is that they may either have to be brought down, which is sad, or maybe somebody will do them the favor of taking them and having them spend a summer in Guatemala, in some barrio. And then they'll go, oh, wait a second. Maybe there's something else for me to do with my life. Maybe there's something that I can do that'll make a difference in the lives of other people. I think that, I think that the danger of the Mormons, the ex-Mormons, is that they are affluent and educated and in many ways very wholesome. And so it may take a few generations for them to realize that if they're not striving to go to heaven, if they stop striving, they may find that, like, without something to fight for, life becomes, life is struggle. And if you eliminate struggle, I think you're going to find people that don't have a sense of identity and don't have a sense of purpose anymore. And so, my thing is this, is like, I'm not trying, like, I don't waste a lot of time or spend a lot of time. Maybe it would be a waste. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people that aren't interested, that they need they need my way of life. Like, if your way of life is working for you, like, or if you think it's working for you, same thing. What I'm telling you is I meet a lot of people who have left the church who are like, I had such a sense of purpose and now I don't have it. I had such a sense of mission, and now I don't have it. I had such a sense of connection, and now I don't have it. And it's those people that I go like, listen, like, let's do this other thing. And if somebody goes like, but that triggers me, I go like, hey, if you're triggered, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Maybe you'll come around later. Maybe you'll come around later when you see what a good time we're having. So I, like, this isn't like, you're not going to get, I will not debate anybody. I have no time to debate anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just, like, but what I do is when I connect with you, I get so excited. Like the last time we talked was offline, and we talked for like 3 hours, and it was like, please come to dinner. And it's just because I just am so excited whenever I encounter somebody who has figured out that kind of core truth. And that is that life is more meaningful when you are passionate about making life more meaningful for other people. So, for the 40 people that are listening to us live, or maybe the 12 that are left.
60. We have 60.
Okay. So, like, I hope that, like, if there's 3 of those that go like, okay, like, I've got my own circle, but like, you've got some, you and John are cooking up some tricks to try to help me open that circle and create space for people that can't make a circle for themselves. I go like, and that sounds like fun. I go like, those are our people. Those are our people.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, when I think about Sunday Assembly and Oasis and other people, all these groups that we talked about, the Mormon Spectrum groups, all the ex-Scientologist groups, the ex-Muslim groups, the
Unitarian Universalist churches,
Jehovah's Witnesses, I see us all as being in this together, experimenting on what we can do to kind of address these problems. Really quickly, you mentioned how many, ex-religious people are going to have to maybe have their kids struggle for a bit, maybe a generation or two before they realize that they're missing something. It's not just that, because it's not like all children of ex-religious people stay secular. A lot of secular people raise religious children because their kids don't find that sense of meaning and purpose in a secular home.
They're susceptible.
And they end up converting to more evangelical religious groups.
They are susceptible. And I would much rather evangelize them into a form of love that doesn't require them to believe in crazy stuff or to hate themselves for being human. And so in one sense, like, I don't want to leave all those kids vulnerable, because I know that when you're 16 years old and you don't have a sense of identity and purpose and mission, anybody that comes along and says like, join my revolution, you're susceptible to it. And I would much rather have it be a revolution that's based on, reason. Not based on reason, but that uses that embraces reason as a way to love people. Because like, for me, the only revolution that's ever going to really capture a kid's attention is one that convinces them that he or she can do something of true value in the world. That's what kids want. They want significance. And so we've got to offer them significance, but I would much rather offer them significance that doesn't require them to hate themselves.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's what I like. You've grabbed on to the term, humanism, or humanist. And it does, coming from my background, kind of a Cold War background, I think you referred it in such a way.
It also has negative connotation.
It has some baggage, but so what do we give people to believe in? I really like this idea of the human race. Like, you look at the way politics are going right now, and the way in some ways we're not always moving in the direction that maybe many of us would want. Sometimes, overall, we've made some really good advances. And like Martin Luther King Jr. said, the long arm of history bends towards justice. That's probably true, but we also backslide a lot along the way. I like the idea of having the goal just be the belief in the importance of mankind, and a desire across each generation to leave the world and humanity a little bit better than we found it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if humanity will last 100 years. I don't know if it'll last 1,000 years. I don't know. But what I do know is, like, if there's something that we're doing that extends humanity even 20 years. It'll give some young woman the chance to discover literature and fall in love with it. It'll discover, some young guy will get all turned on to math, and he'll learn, and they might meet each other and fall in love. And I loved falling in love with my wife. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I remember it was so much fun, and it's been so, and if they could if I could extend it 20 years and just one more generation of kids got to fall in love, that would be worth it. I don't know what the future is. It may be that the civilization, like all species, most species, it seems like they rise up and then they die out. And you go like, well, what's the point if we're all going to die out? And the point is right now. Right now, you and I are friends. And you know what? It's really valuable for me to be friends with you right now. And so like, if something you and I can do will make a space where some other kid, instead of killing himself, will end up having friends in some town in Utah 20 years from now, I'm like, let's do that. Let's do that, because aren't we loving our lives? Like, don't you want to share that? Like, and so for me, yeah, humanism, I don't think of it as secular humanism, God, atheism, let's stamp out religion. For me, it's just like being human is being limited. It's being small and not knowing everything and not being sure of everything and knowing that you're going to die someday. And I go, like, within those limitations, there can be a lot of meaning and a lot of beauty and a lot of joy. And I'm just committed to that experience. And I want to share it with other people. And so, yeah, I think humanism is not a bad thing to call what we are. But you said, like, you know what, these communities, I think like we should just call them communities of good. And I was like, that's a damn good name. I'll go, I like that real well, because that's the thing, is like what people need to know is like this community is about something. And if you want to be a part of it, you don't have to believe anything in particular, but you got to be committed to this value.
But it kind of does involve identifying best practices of living a happy, healthy life, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Like, and that's the thing. Like I'm not, like, when I don't say this is the way of life. Like, if you're an autistic kid in China, I'm not sure that my form of community is the thing that's going to like really help you. You may be better off in, human thriving for you is going to look very different because of the way your brain's configured. And so I'm just saying, like, this is a way of life that works for a lot of people I know across a lot of different boundaries. And so, like, this is just what I got to offer. Like, and it's like exercise. Like, if you do yoga, great. And this other person goes like, well, weightlifting has changed my life. And I'm like, great. Like, I think everybody should be healthy. I don't have a particular, you don't need to get healthy the way I'm getting healthy. I'm just saying, like, this is what I have to show you. Like, this is the way I know. And like, so when you and I find each other, we just go like, oh yeah, our ways are very similar. We should just try to help people who respond to this way of life. And then if there are other ways of life that cause other people to thrive, we should like go like, hey, good for you. That wouldn't work for me, but terrific.
Right.
And right. So like, yeah. So I just think like we are offering a way of life and sort of saying, these are the best practices that we know. If you want to be happy this way, like you don't have to ride a bicycle, but if you ride a bicycle, these are the things we've learned about riding bicycles. And so like the only thing you and I really have to show anybody is how to be happy the way we're happy.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of kids out there and nobody's trying to show them how to be happy anyway. And so when an old guy like you shows up and says, hey son, you want to have coffee with me? Like a kid goes, you'll have coffee with me? Yeah. Yeah. And because that's, I mean, at USC, people say to me, how do you get kids to hang out with you? I go like, I just ask them. Like, no kid I ever asked to coffee ever turned me down.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we should go. This is beautiful.
All right, Bart.
Like we build it up to 61, and I'm worried that if we keep talking, your Facebook Live crowd will begin to diminish, and we'll know that we've bored everybody to death.
So it sounds like we need a curriculum or a text for how to live the good life, and then we need the right formula for how to create a community experience that's really compelling and engaging, that people will feel like they're missing out on if they don't
I wonder
attend.
if we need text, or I wonder if we need a critical process by which we could read any text and ask the same questions, and we could pull truth out of virtually any text if we were asking the right questions. Like I worry about I worry about that, like that stuff that your friends are worried about. I don't want to go to sort of like, I've written the book. Like, I just want to say, like, you know what? Here's a book, a book called Consolations of Mortality, right? A meditation, making sense of death, written by a guy named Andrew Stark. I don't know what he says, but I have a feeling that whether I agree or disagree, if you and I read this book together and we asked the right questions, we would be able to draw stuff out of it that would help us to live better.
I just wonder if like principles around sound mental health, principles around healthy relationships, principles around rearing healthy kids, principles around, building community.
I think those are going to emerge.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to be part of it. That's all I'm saying.
I really do. Like I read Martin Seligman, and he has those 5 sort of
Seligman, right? Yeah.
And I just go like, you know what? I think, and then I read this other book called The Power of Meaning, and she's got 4. But gosh, you know what? They're the same as his 5. They're just cut up differently. Mm-hmm. And I go like, I think what is emerging is this sense that people are getting that like, you gotta, if you want to flourish, you gotta have some good relationships. You've got to do some work that makes a difference in the lives of other people. And you've got to cultivate a sense of gratitude and a sense of wonder and a sense of curiosity about the world around you. And I have a feeling that like, however we chop those things up, if we can turn people onto that stuff, they're going to be okay.
So if our listeners want to help be a part of this, what do they do?
Well, for now, they listen to Mormon stories. Now, like my podcast is called Humanize Me. And all we do every week is talk with people about the last person I talked to was this woman who does a Harry Potter as sacred text thing. Uh-huh. It's just a book group that she runs that's aimed at helping people pursue goodness. And like I talked to an improv artist one week, I talked to a scientist the next week, but it's all aimed at this, like, how do we help each other make the most of this life? And how do we build communities where that happens? So, I mean, I think part of it is like, we gotta start listening and talking to each other. But I think that the main thing is that people who hear this, who get turned on by it, rather than like thinking that they've got to start the next huge thing, start to say like, what would it take for me just to invite a handful of people over once a week to have a conversation about becoming better people? I think if it started there, like, I think that, and like, we're just going to pick a book and we'll read it together and we'll just ask the question at the end of every chapter, how could we use this to be better parents, to be better friends, to be better spouses, to be better neighbors? I think it sounds like a Nike ad, but just try it, just do it. It's not rocket science. So, I mean, I think that I wish I could say to people like, go to this website and you can find a local humanist community in your neighborhood. And there are people, there aren't. I get letters every day from people going, I'm the only person I know. I don't know what to do. And I go like, you know what? Some people are going to have to learn to be a little more articulate about like, I'm trying to be a better person. And then invite people to go like, would you want to get together and try to be a better person with me? I think I don't want to say it's that simple, but I think the place to start is that simple.
I love it. All right. Bart, thank you, brother. Let's talk again soon.
We will talk again soon. We'll do this thing on your podcast in a month, and that'll be beautiful. For now, just love, goodness, happiness. I'll talk to you soon.
Back at you, brother. Thanks so much for joining us. All right.
Bye.
Talk soon. Okay, bye.